Welcome to AI for Data. Today we're going to ask one question. Can ChatGPT and GPT-v4 tell data stories? What I mean by data stories is, can it form a narrative? Can it look at a data table or a chart and say, this is what happened, and this is what's worth investigating? These are potential causal factors. To do that, we're going to start with Wikipedia's list of highest grossing movies. Here you can see it's the top 50 worldwide, and I'm just going to copy and paste that data table and ask a question. I have a data table of the top grossing films of all time. What narratives can you tell me about the movie industry based on this data? Let's see what they say. And this is on GPT v4. Franchise power. Okay, this has to be, if you're starting from scratch and you want to talk to someone about films, what's going on recently, what's going on with top grossing films of all time, but it has been going on recently, you got to talk about franchise power. So it is talking about Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. These are the biggest effects in all of box office. So this is an absolutely wonderful narrative to bring up, and it seems to be weaving it quite fluently. Sequels and remakes. Yep, okay, this one's been around for a decade or more. That's longer than a decade, but people have been aware that the sequel effect has been around for then. High budget spectacles, okay, not too surprising, but good. Diversity in genres, okay, now it's getting just sort of a little bit obvious, but this is still great. Worldwide appeal. Okay, this is actually a really interesting one. A lot of people, when Avatar 2 came out, they're like, I don't know why anyone thought this would make any money, except if you look worldwide, it absolutely is going to make a lot of money. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but like it's has a lot of visual appeal. It translates well because the script isn't really the most important part, all this sort of stuff. Longevity. That's really cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And then directorial influence. This is a phenomenal list. So just based on this, I would say GPT v4 is doing a stellar job. Okay, but there's a caveat here, right? How can it know that all of these things are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Star Wars or Jurassic Park? Like I guess Jurassic Park might all be in there and Star Wars might be in there, but they're not all labeled Marvel, right? Captain America: Civil War. I didn't tell it was Marvel. Okay, so it's pulling from other information. And that should tell you two things. First of all, it tells you that that it is definitely more valuable the more context you feed it. And right now, GPT v4 can only take some amount of information, much more than v3, but still not enough for you to sort of feed it all of your knowledge. So there is going to be a gap for a long time. But also it should lead to a question, which is, okay, well, how well does it do without that additional context? So to do that, we're going to turn to 2023 data. And some of these movies obviously are still connected to movies from earlier, but this should be post most of this information should be post the training date of GPT-v4. I'm going to feed it the top 100 films, and we're going to say, okay, how well do you do with just the data at hand? And I'm going to start a new chat too, just so it's not biased by that other information. The top grossing films of 2023 so far. What narratives can you tell me about the film industry this year based on this data? Let's see what it does. Okay. Dominance of big franchises and sequels. Okay, so it is connecting to previous data. So it's recognizing that Avatar: The Way of Water is tied to Avatar, Ant-Man is tied to Ant-Man, Creed 3 is tied to Creed 2, Puss in Boots is tied, yes, okay. Action superhero films remain. So this one's arguable, right? Like maybe it's pulling from old data, so this is maybe a faulty test. But this one is purely within the, I think this is purely within the data I fed it, right? Because it's going with action, and it can probably tell that this is like superhero. Diverse genres and top grossing films. Not a super interesting point, but it is very plausibly just from this data set. Strong performance of horror films. Okay. Horror genre. This seems to be very in line with just 2023 and is telling us something interesting. International and indie films. Great. Okay. So it's telling us something interesting there that I wouldn't have necessarily looked for. Re-releases and special screenings. Okay. That's funny. It's giving me advice on what data to feed it. Okay, so this is pretty good, right? So what you should be thinking here is that as you build out a platform to use these data tools, it's absolutely going to be the case that a lot of data teams are just going to go, here's a data table, ChatGPT, or GPT-v4 through the API. Why don't you write an analysis based on it? And this is the sort of thing that's going to come out of it. Okay, and then there's one more thing that I'd like to explore, which is this is v4, right? Let's go back to v3 and see how well it does, so just so that we can get a sense of at least some of the trajectory. So I'm going to copy the data set again. We're going to take this back to a v3 model, and we're going to look at the difference. Now, I haven't done this before, so we're doing this live. Let's go back to, okay, we can only go back to the old 3.5. It's funny that this is old now, but let's give it a try. Data set of the top grossing films of all time. What narratives can you tell me about the film industry based on this data? Action and adventure are profitable. Okay, so this is good, and they mentioned this in the 2023 one, so you can sort of see it's like sort of a baseline truth. Fantasy and science fiction are also popular. This immediately feels still good, arguably, but like much less interesting. Reboots and sequels are big business. Okay, so this was point 2 in the first one, but it's not nearly as good. It's not nearly as well formulated. Animated films are also successful, and high quality special effects. So this feels fine, but it definitely lacks some of the intelligence of the other one. The other one to me feels like a good analysis, and this one feels like, they kind of phoned it in. Okay, so what does this mean, and what comes next? Well, I think it's clear that ChatGPT can tell some data stories right now, but I think what's much more interesting is the trajectory. So 3.5 did an okay job telling data stories with a high context data set. 4 did a really good job with a high context data set, and an okay job with the low context one. Now, you move that out 3, maybe 5, maybe 10 years, and what are we going to see? Well, I think it's very clear that what we're going to see are some tools which are constantly being fed internal data within a company, and in return, we'll be able to answer language-based questions. Now, if you work in data and you're going, wait a minute, that's my job. What am I going to be doing in 3, 5, 10 years when AI is able to do this? Well, it's impossible to know exactly what's going to happen, but I take comfort in the fact that right now analytics is as automated as it has ever been. The ability for me to run a complex analysis on a very large data set that's gone through a lot of iterations of cleaning is something that would have taken hundreds of people in previous eras. And is my job less valuable now? No, it's much more valuable. But there's one caveat, which is that the only reason that I'm able to be more productive and more valuable to a company is that I've kept up to date on the most recent tools. I'm not using a slide rule, I'm not using a TI-83, I'm going to use R, and if I have to, Python. So, how do we keep up with the most recent tools now? How do we follow best practices? How do we make sure we know what the latest tech is doing and how it can impact our work? Well, welcome to AI for Data.